Hello, and welcome to the Tom and Ben News Wikipedia News Edition. On 10th episode of Season 2 is BBC. The British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, is a British public service broadcaster headquartered at the Broadcasting House in London. Originally established in 1922 as the British Broadcasting Company and evolved into its current state with its current name on New Year's Day 1927.
The oldest and largest local and global broadcaster, by stature and by number of employees, it employs over 21,000 staff in total, of whom approximately 17,900 are in public sector broadcasting.
The BBC is established under a royal charter and operates under its agreement with the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport.
Its work is funded principally by an annual television license fee, which is charged to all British households, companies, and organizations using any type of equipment to receive or record live television broadcasts or watch using iPlayer.
The fee is set by the British government, agreed by Parliament, and is used to fund the BBC's radio, TV, and online services, covering the nations and regions of the UK.
Since 1 April 2014, it has also funded the BBC World Service, launched in 1932 as the BBC Empire Service, which broadcasts in 28 languages and provides comprehensive TV, radio, and online services in Arabic and Persian.
Around a quarter of the BBC's revenue comes from its commercial subsidiary BBC Studios, formerly BBC Worldwide, which sells BBC programs and services internationally, and also distributes the BBC's international 24-hour English-language news services BBC World News, and from BBC.com, provided by BBC Global News Limited.
In 2009, the company was awarded the Queen's Award for Enterprise in recognition of its international achievements.
Since its formation in 1922, the BBC has played a prominent role in British life and culture.
It is colloquially known as the Big Warranty.
Britain's first live public broadcast was made from the factory of Marconi's Wireless Telegraph Company in Chelmsford in June 1920.
It was sponsored by the Daily Mail's Lord Northcliffe and featured the famous Australian soprano Dame Nellie Melba.
The Melba broadcast caught the people's imagination and marked a turning point in the British public's attitude to radio.
However, this public enthusiasm was not shared in official circles, where such broadcasts were held to interfere with important military and civil communications.
By late 1920, pressure from these quarters and uneasiness among the staff of the licensing authority, the General Post Office, GPO, was sufficient to lead to a ban on further Chelmsford broadcasts. But by 1922, the GPO had received nearly 100 broadcast license requests and moved to rescind its ban in the wake of a petition by 63 wireless societies with over 3,000 members.
Anxious to avoid the same chaotic expansion experienced in the United States, the GPO proposed that it would issue a single broadcasting license to a company jointly owned by a consortium of leading wireless receiver manufacturers, to be known as the British Broadcasting Company Limited, which was formed on 18 October 1922.
John Reef, a Scottish Calvinist, was appointed its general manager in December 1922, a few weeks after the company made its first official broadcast.
Leonard Stanton Jeffries was its first director of music.
The company was to be financed by a royalty on the sale of BBC wireless receiving sets from approved domestic manufacturers.
To this day, the BBC aims to follow the Recian directive to inform, educate, and entertain.
The financial arrangements soon proved inadequate.
Set sales were disappointing as amateurs made their own receivers and listeners bought rival unlicensed sets.
By mid-1923, discussions between the GPO and the BBC had become deadlocked, and the Postmaster General commissioned a review of broadcasting by the Sykes Committee.
The committee recommended a short-term reorganization of license fees with improved enforcement in order to address the BBC's immediate financial distress, and an increased share of the license revenue split between it and the GPO.
This was to be followed by a simple 10 shillings license fee to fund broadcasts.
The BBC's broadcasting monopoly was made explicit for the duration of its current broadcast license, as was the prohibition on advertising.
To avoid competition with newspapers, Fleet Street persuaded the government to ban news bulletins before 7 p.m. and the BBC was required to source all news from external wire services. Mid-1925 found the future of broadcasting under further consideration, this time by the Crawford Committee.
By now, the BBC, under Reef's leadership, had forged a consensus favoring a continuation of the unified monopoly broadcasting service, but more money was still required to finance rapid expansion.
Wireless manufacturers were anxious to exit the loss-making consortium, with Reef keen that the BBC be seen as a public service rather than a commercial enterprise.
The recommendations of the Crawford Committee were published in March the following year and were still under consideration by the GPO when the 1926 general strike broke out in May.
The strike temporarily interrupted newspaper production, and with restrictions on news bulletins waived, the BBC suddenly became the primary source of news for the duration of the crisis. The crisis placed the BBC in a delicate position.
On the one hand, Reef was acutely aware that the government might exercise its right to commandeer the BBC at any time as a mouthpiece of the government if the BBC were to step out of line, but on the other he was anxious to maintain public trust by appearing to be acting independently.
The government was divided on how to handle the BBC, but ended up trusting Reef, whose opposition to the strike mirrored the PM zone.
Although Winston Churchill in particular wanted to commandeer the BBC to use it to the best possible advantage, Reef wrote that Stanley Baldwin's government wanted to be able to say that they did not commandeer the BBC, but they know that they can trust us not to be really impartial.
Thus the BBC was granted sufficient leeway to pursue the government's objectives largely in a manner of its own choosing.
The resulting coverage of both striker and government viewpoints impressed millions of listeners who were unaware that the PM had broadcast to the nation from Reef's home using one of Reef's sound bites inserted at the last moment, or that the BBC had banned broadcasts from the Labour Party and delayed a peace appeal by the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Supporters of the strike nicknamed the BBC the BFC for British Falsehood Company.
Reef personally announced the end of the strike, which he marked by reciting from Blake's Jerusalem, signifying that England had been saved.
While the BBC tends to characterize its coverage of the general strike by emphasizing the positive impression created by its balanced coverage of the views of government and strikers, Gene Seaton, professor of media history and the official BBC historian, has characterized the episode as the invention of modern propaganda in its British form.
Whoa!
Rees argued that trust, gained by authentic impartial news, could then be used.
Impartial news was not necessarily an end in itself. The BBC did well out of the crisis, which cemented a national audience for its broadcasting, and it was followed by the government's acceptance of the recommendation made by the Crawford Committee, 1925-26, that the British Broadcasting Company be replaced by a non-commercial, Crown-chartered organization, the British Broadcasting Corporation. We will continue about BBC in Part 2. Stay tuned.